Welcome, everyone. So excited to have you join us today for a conversation with white folks about reconnecting to our spirit and our humanity, to interrupt white supremacy and all the ways that we devalue and dehumanize living beings. All of us first came together in June, soon after the brutal murder of George Floyd by police. We're coming back together again today to be in conversation, a kitchen table conversation about reconnecting and reclaiming our spirit and our humanity as a way to interrupt white supremacy. This is essential inner work, and the essential inner work is for the purpose of being able to be in right relationship to the whole, to be connected to ourselves and each other and all living beings, and to be able to take action. So what's the context of the conversation today? We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that we're at a moment in history where 150,000 people have died from COVID in the United States. And what we know is it's disproportionately impacting Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and that is rooted in white supremacy and the baseline belief that bodies other than white are disposable. And we need to be with that discomfort of that knowing. We're here today in a moment in history when there's an uprising that's happening across our nation about the violence that's been extracted and inflicted upon Black, Indigenous, and communities of color by our systems, by police, all rooted in white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And we're here today also knowing that white supremacy is a systemic issue across our country that we as white people benefit from. We benefit from, and the complexity and the paradox is that we also suffer from white supremacy, which is also hard to say at the same time when we know the level of pain and violence against Black, Indigenous communities is so very deep and profound. But we know that we have a responsibility as white folks coming together. And what we have found as practitioners is that by reclaiming and reconnecting to our spirit, that it's given us what we need to be able to be on our journey to interrupt white supremacy and anti-Blackness. Today, we want to be really clear, as we were in our invitation, this is not an anti-racism or a race equity liberation training, and that work too is essential. We encourage all the white folks to be on that journey to learn and just to really hold the awareness that anti-racism work is not a way for you to deflect your responsibility or to divert from it or perform it, but it's about expanding the possibilities of what that inner work can really do for all of us, for each of us as white folks and for the entirety of humanity. We want to thank all of the folks that we have learned from across the span of our time together in community. We especially want to thank folks like Monica Dennis, Rachel Ibrahim, Anna Perez, Tammy Johnson, Judith LeBlanc, Christine Davidson, ML Daniels, and so many more that have taught us. We want to especially thank, because here's the thing, we're all, and I say this with great humility, we're practitioners. We are not spiritual leaders, but we are definitely guided by the wisdom and the generosity and the grace of spiritual leaders like Roshi's Norma Wong, Rosie Abraham, and Reverend ML Daniel, and many other spiritual beings. And we come here today with that learnings that we have been really trying to integrate ourselves. So our conversation today is also not one about self-improvement. I just want to be super clear around that. I had lots of conversations with good friends about what this really is. But it's really about, like, how do we reconnect to spirit and humanity to be in right relationship to the whole, as I mentioned earlier, to be able to take the actions moment to moment that are needed to interrupt the invasiveness of white supremacy that we've all been socialized into and anti-Blackness. So our conversation today is about what is required of us. I'm Kelly Miller, and I'm just super excited to be here today with my friends, Karen and Ed and Kristen, and I'm gonna ask them to each introduce themselves. I'm here in Boise, Just really glad to be here to share both the joy and the love and the messiness of this learning journey for myself. And I'll invite Karen. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly, and thanks. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm just honored to be in this community with Ed and Kelly and Kristen and everybody else that you mentioned, Kelly, as well as all of you who've taken the time out to be on this call. I'm Karen. I'm here in just outside of Burlington, Vermont, and again, so pleased to be here. Thanks. I guess shall I call on Ed now, Kelly?
I think you call on whoever you like.
Okay, I'll call on you, Ed.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Ed Heisler. I use him, he, him pronouns, and I am in Duluth, Minnesota. And I would just echo, I'm super excited to be here. It's a real joy to be able to have a roundtable type conversation with three other friends and then do it in a broader community with all of you. I think the role of white people includes an awful lot of community building and spirit work. And so it's a privilege to be here with you all. How about you, Kristen?
Hey, everybody. My name is Kristen, and I'm here in Oakland, California, traditional Ohlone Chochenyo land. And I'm also excited to be at this kitchen table with you all and the expanded community that's gathered. And I just wanted to say that part of what I'm doing this for is my son and all the little ones that I'm in relationship to and the generations to come, and then also my ancestors and all of the ancestors that come before us.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm glad you joined us. I was a little nervous for a moment when you disappeared from the screen.
It was too loud outside, even though I wanted to be with the plants. It was not fortuitous.
Well, thanks for being here. Karen, you want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do today?
Sure. So today, this is a kitchen table conversation. So in many ways, it's like a fishbowl conversation where the four of us all talk about some of our learning and our experience and our relationship to spirit and how it impacts our anti-racism work and our ability to see racism and white supremacy. And so we're gonna engage in a conversation about two practice area questions, and we'll weave these through our kitchen table conversation. So the first question is, how does our connection to spirit expand our capacity to see or be conscious of white supremacy and anti-Blackness more clearly in ourselves, others, and in the world around us? And the second question is, how have our practices to reconnect to spirit supported us to embody mutuality for all living beings, which includes taking action in our family and our community to interrupt white supremacy and anti-Blackness?
Thanks, Karen. Before we get started, we want to acknowledge that this call is being hosted from the lands of the Burns Paiute tribe, the Confederate tribes of Warm Springs, Fort McDermott Paiute, Shoshone Paiute, Shoshone Bannock, and we have such gratitude for their stewardship of the lands over the many generations. We also want to thank Amy York on tech today, Sierra Mulver and Lavana Andrew, who are part of our ASL interpreters, and Lisa Doyon, who is our closed captioner. We couldn't do this without them and really appreciate their attentiveness to making sure that this conversation is accessible for all. Finally, we're going to have an opportunity to practice together collectively. We had conversations about whether or not to chat or not to chat. And what we decided that this was a wonderful opportunity for all of us to practice really being present and in the moment with this conversation. We know that one of the habits of white supremacy is to divert ourselves from conversations, to try to multitask and never be really fully present. And we're just going to invite you to be fully present today with our conversation. We're going to have the chat function open where we'll only be going to us. But here's the thing, we're just going to be in relationship with one another today, and we're not going to monitor the chat. But Amy will be there if you have any problems with technology. So I encourage you, if you're struggling in any way, to reach out to Amy on chat. We do invite you, if you have questions that you would like for us to explore at a later date, to leave those in the chat, or if you have reflections or an aha moment or uh-oh moment, whatever comes up, please feel free to leave that and just be with us for the next, like, oh, looks like we got about, oh, I can't do math. 90 minutes minus 15, whatever that is, 75. Next 75 minutes. All right, are we ready to kind of like dive in, folks? Yeah. So what about that first question about connection? Who's got the appetite to like dive into that one?
Kelly, are we going to do any breathing before we start?
Oh yeah, thanks for transparent facilitation. I love you for that. Ed, I almost forgot you.
That's all right. So we're going to invite everybody to actually join us in a simple breathing activity. And the reason that we do this to start out with is, first of all, just to give ourselves an opportunity to open up our breath. Sometimes throughout the course of our day, we oftentimes find ourselves tightening up and constricting, and opening our breath is a way of reopening to the possibility and the connection to things around us. It's a way of getting ourselves grounded and set to be fully present with one another. And actually, even though we're on Zoom, and even though we all have our own little boxes on this thing, when we take a few breaths together, it actually starts to syncopate our heartbeats and our body rhythms. So it creates resonance between all of us on this call as well. So I just invite folks either to sit in your chairs, or you can stand with me, one or the other. And we're going to do something that we call a sunrise. It's a pretty simple breathing activity. Just start with your hands at the side, and then you're going to bring your hands up towards your head like this with an inhale. And then down to your side, exhale. And then back up, inhale. And exhale. We're just going to do that a few times. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. One more. Thanks, everybody.
Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, Karen, what do you think? First question about how does our connection to spirit expand our capacity to see or be conscious or aware of white supremacy and anti-Blackness more clearly in ourselves and others and all around us? Anyone feeling want to go?
Yeah, I'm good to go. I have known all of you for a pretty long time now, and I think that, we've been together through a lot of spiritual work, and so I know what I'm about to say will feel very real to you if you remember who I was when we first met. And so the practices for me around spirit have actually solved the ego problem for me. And the ego problem is really about what does it mean to center whiteness. I occupy a space that is fundamentally about wishing to be a good person, a good white person, a good anti-racist person. And in the absence of a connection to spirit, what that looks like is centering my whiteness and centering my upbringing, which was, I'll be 60 this year. And so I was raised with the Disney-esque culture that was about heroes, singular heroes, Daniel Boone, and you know, all the singular heroes of the Disney world that I was raised with. And so from the time I was a small child, I was centering this notion that I wanted to be a hero. And so connection to spirit, or a disconnection from spirit, fills all that in. And my relationship to anti-racism work for a very, very long time, and this is not 100%, I mean, this still happens. My relationship with anti-racism work and my ability to see anti-racism work was in relationship to performance. Performance as a good liberal white person, performance as a hero, performance as a white savior. And the spiritual practices that I've been engaging in, and I'm certainly a practitioner, and I try to meditate, but mostly my practices are centered around cooking, gardening, building stuff with my hands, doing some art. Those practices have so much deepened my ability to see myself and to see my own humanity, which gives me the ability to see others' humanities. And what it does is it pushes aside. It moves the energy around ego and white savior out of the way, which then allows me to engage in my own recognition of the white supremacy that's deeply baked into me. And it allows me to make choices about how I use my energy in ways that are less about how it feels and more about what I see. So it's less about ego and more about this is what is. This is what is. And if I think that this is unjust, then the question is, what are we, not so much me, what are we going to do together about that? Kelly, you said this at the beginning, white supremacy causes so much incredible harm and violence in the world. And it also requires me as a white person to be disconnected from the people and communities around me. And that's part of the cost of white supremacy to me as a white person. Engaging in a spiritual practice, though, has helped to reconnect me to myself and to the communities around me. And so that in and of itself is an act in defiance of white supremacy. The ability to use my energy differently is a liberatory choice. And there's great potential, at least for me, to be able to engage in the reality of white supremacy and racism in my life, inside of me and in my community, in a way that isn't focused on my ego. There's just so much potential there, and I'm doing my best to live into that potential. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, as you're talking about that, Karen, a lot of that certainly resonates with me. I grew up in a pretty normal, small white town in northern Wisconsin, and I grew up, in a really supportive, loving family, and and in conditions that were quite supportive. And so I went through this process when I left home and went into the bigger, broader world of like realizing all the harm and all the damage and the pain and the suffering that was happening to people, and getting pretty angry about it. I think anger is an emotion that a lot of us will identify with feeling when we start to realize how we've been connected to so much harm. And I think one of the things that happened is, as I started to get active involved in work to address white supremacy, work for racial equity, other forms of violence as well, I sort of adopted a framework where there was good people and there were bad people, and there were good philosophies and there were bad philosophies, and there were good ways of looking at things and there were bad ways of looking at things. And it was like this spreadsheet, or this grid that I was operating out of, and trying to tick all the right boxes, trying to do it just right, because I wanted to be a good person, and I wanted to distance as far as I possibly could from the things that were causing harm, from the things that were causing violence, from things that were racist, from things that were white supremacist. And so as a result, the way that I was in community, oftentimes I was very much distancing myself from people who didn't agree with me. I was quick to critique and express anger towards different people who had different opinions, that kind of stuff. And one of the things that spirit practice has done for me, it's also created a reconnection, but it's a reconnection back into community. When I think about what spirit actually is, I think that spirit is our connection and our relationship to ourselves, to the people around us, to all things. It's the way that all things are connected and that we have relationship. And that is interrupted and undermined by white supremacy purposefully. And my reconnection to spirit actually didn't come through any specific spiritual practice. I had gotten disillusioned and upset with the Christianity that I had grown up with. But the way that I reconnected to spirit was actually through community, and having really in-depth relationships and connections with people. And the way that I could tell that it was happening is that I hadn't done things like art for a long period of time. And I slowly started picking up things that were artistic and watching things that were beautiful emerge out of that. Music started to be something that I enjoyed in a different way. I was actually dancing with people, joking with people, like in the joy of actually being connected with other people and able to actually see people as best I could for who they are. And so that reconnection, I mean, as far as being able to see white supremacy and see anti-Blackness, what it allowed for was for me to drop that veil between like the imaginary distance that I was putting between myself and anti-Blackness and white supremacy. I was able to see that if you're socialized, if you're brought up as a white person in this country, that in and of itself is part of, that's what white supremacy is. There's no such thing actually as white people as a group, right? It's a way that resources get funneled from one group of people to another. And so the way that I had learned to be was one that was steeped in white supremacy and steeped in anti-Blackness. And I could look back at my generations of many amazing people, even in my own family, and see where decisions had been made. They had adopted white supremacist and anti-Black belief systems. They had continued in the ways that they are good people as well. And it really became an opportunity by reconnecting to spirit to really fully face the intergenerational truth of the fact that we are steeped in a white supremacist culture and we are shaped by white supremacy. And also to be able to look fully at what has allowed us to survive, what has allowed for the goodness to continue to emerge in white people and in all people, like to see that goodness in its fullest sense too, so that instead of just focusing on all of the harm and all of the bad things and being on alert and trying to distance from it, I can accept that that's my work to do to fix it, and I also can look at where the potential and where the goodness and where the humanity is coming from in people as well.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you, Sierra, for interpreting. And now it looks like Lavana's coming on. We want to make sure we're talking slow. I want to talk a little bit more too about spirit and hear what Kristen has to say, but just some of the, for me, when I think of spirit, Ed, I think what you talked about being so much about learning spirit and community. And for me, spirit is kind of that deep knowing about everything being so interconnected. And it's that connective tissue to something so much bigger than ourselves and the greater whole. And when I think about how I connect to spirit in a way to increase my awareness, my spiritual practices have come primarily from the Zen practice through my teacher, Norma Wong, over the last 4 to 5 years. And what's most essential for me has been any of the practices that are about quiet, that are about having a pause. And so that looks like for me, any kind of low and slow breathing practice. It looks like meditative practice. It can also look like just being fully present and conscious when I'm doing chores, which is one of the practices I was introduced to. And Karen, when you mentioned cooking, it reminded me of a story when I was at a retreat and we were all doing our part to keep the community picked up and clean. And I was sweeping and sweeping. And I remember someone came over and gently reminded me that I was not the only person sweeping, which was such a white supremacist kind of like habit of just believing it's all on you, like it's all on me. I mean, it's so egocentric. I just shake my head now thinking about that. But when you brought up community, Ed, I was thinking about that. It's that realizing that we are not alone, and that when we are reconnected and have reclaimed our connection to spirit and our humanity, I'm able to see things more clearly. Like I'm not the only person sweeping out there, that there are many of us sweeping. And so that was just something that came up for me. How about you, Kristen?
Well, so much is coming up for me right now. I think for me, part of, and I can talk a little bit more about my experience of spirit later, but I think for me, part of what's happened over the last several years as, kind of I've engaged more in intentional practice to reconnect has been noticing just the similarities between patterns of intergenerational violence and trauma, like in my own family, and then making connections to patterns of, domination and trauma that get replicated intergenerationally across our peoples. And so part of what, and so for me, there's this element of shame, I think, that like always informed my anti-racism activism, like pretty early on, when I was still a teenager, I was really drawn to trying to understand, racism and do anti-racist work. And there was a way that, I don't think anybody, and nobody was doing mind-body integration stuff at that time. People were not, like, I think that there was a vigilance, in terms of taming us as white people, to interrupt and intervene, with all the people we're in relationship with, it, which is definitely important. But I think the more and more work I did on that level, and then in a parallel way did work on my own family trauma and how that's lodged in my body, the more connections I started to feel and see in terms of what happened, like disassociation, like the way shame makes you really small and actually like really alters what you have to bring to a situation. It doesn't bring, life-giving transformative power. It brings this like smallness and scaredness and rigidity. And to be honest, like, I think there's a way, you know, we can focus in a lot of ways on policy and systemic issues, like in terms of doing interventions in racist, you know, in white supremacist systems, but like over and over again, like I've seen in myself and also other people, how we might know what the right thing is to do, but we show up with completely whack energy, you know, and we harm people. We harm other white folks, we we weaponize white, you know, kind of our anti-racist work. And then we actually aren't showing up fully for friends of color either. Like we're tight, we're vigilant, and we're not bringing the possibility of something different. And so I think for me, you know, becoming a parent, you know, in terms of, and a parent of a biracial kid, like there's this reckoning like I had to do with like, what's my responsibility and how, like, what is the way to shift intergenerational cycles of harm and violence in many different ways? And what is the community and the family that we want to build together, you know, to do that? And then how might we do that in community, you know, in bigger and bigger circles? So I guess I started to notice, you know, it's really similar to what you're talking about, Karen, in terms of letting go of the ego and the need to fix things, or the need to be the person who solves the problem. Because, and, you know, again, that's really tied to like a trauma response. But like I noticed the more I was able to let go of that, and the more I was able to cultivate my own joy, the more I had to, and even consider joy as a possibility, that the more I had to bring to any circle or project or campaign or anything that I'm in. And the more creative I've been, and the more open I've been, you know, the less guarded I've been. I could go on, but yeah, I feel like, yeah, cycles of trauma are really intertwined for me. And so, you know, I said this on our last call, there's a way I can't separate anti-Black racism from colonization, you know, and and the relationship of that. And I feel like at the root of colonization, which started before we even, you know, any of us got here, it started in, you know, there were threads of that in Europe, that at the core, it's like the part of that project is cutting us off from our spirits, cutting off connection to anything but the project of, you know, controlling and dominating things and extracting. So that's where I am.
Any kind of reflections from Karen or Ed? Or a couple things are coming up for me, but jump in there.
Well, I just want to, Kristen, I really appreciate you raising this thing about intergenerational trauma and that reality. And I'm always reminded of the words of our dear friend Farah Tanis, who says, white people, you need to get yourselves together and do your healing, because you're killing us. And, you know, I've taken that advice to heart. And the intergenerational trauma and that aspect of the intersection of intergenerational trauma that goes way, 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 way back, and the culture of white supremacy and the culture of toxic masculinity that goes hand in hand with that. I think you have profound impacts on white people and our ability to accept violence against bodies of color.
Yeah, Karen, I'm super curious around that. There's always a lot of suspicion when white folks are talking about healing ourselves first, or doing that inner work, as if it doesn't also equate with taking action. There's just a lot of like, and I totally get why Black, Indigenous, and folks of color would not trust white people. They have all good reason not to trust white people, right? So there's that, you know, historical legacy of genocide and enslavement and Western superiority, all of that. But what I know to be true is, like, for my own spiritual reconnection work over the last several years, still very much in process, right? On day to day, taking time to pause and reflect. it's about an awareness of my own beingness. It's about like being able to release myself from all the ways I've been immersed and attached to white supremacy. And so I can actually do and act in very different ways than I would otherwise. So it's kind of, how's that landing for other people in terms of like that inner work being so essential, but not being, not connected to not responding or not doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we aren't in right relationship with ourselves, if we experience disconnection or, you know, trauma is experienced creating a distance or things like that, that does create like it's an essential spiritual disconnect, and it's something that, as Kristen says, it has been fostered for a long time. And I think um, the thing that like really resonates that you're saying that's important about that is that we have a responsibility. Like part of the spiritual reconnection piece is to recognize that everybody actually comes with beauty and gifts and like things that we things that we bring to the world and that we bring to the universe, things that are helpful to the other people around us, things that help make for better communities, things that help make for a better society. And they are like, it's very much about our ability to be connected to ourselves and understand at an essential nature our goodness and the things that bring joy and the things that resonate and bring joy to others. And so part of the work, from my perspective, like specifically part of the work for white people, is that spirit work. It's that individual reconnection work that we have to do in order to actually bring our biggest, fullest selves. That doesn't mean that we always have to be the ones on the podium or that we have to be the ones that are in the places of positional leadership or positional authority all the time. But it means bringing with all of our might, like everything that we got, what we can into community. And that's a part of our deep responsibility. And to me, that's a big part of spiritual practice is we actually have to relearn, particularly as white people, what it means to actually be in community in a way that understands that essential and spiritual connection that we have with ourselves, with the land, with the water, with the things that are greater than us around us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super curious about like, how do we, I mean, I'm thinking about myself too, like, how do I know that I'm reconnecting to spirit? I mean, for me, it's, and we talked about this the other day. So, I mean, it is textual. I think about, I mean, it sounds kind of corny, but I know like when I am like practicing fully and I'm like taking time to sit and meditate, or I'm breathing, or when I'm washing dishes, I'm just washing dishes, or when I'm sweeping, but no, and I'm not sweeping alone. Um, that, and then there's like a different energy. I don't know how to describe it. Like everything is more vibrant. I'm fully present. I'm much more aware. You know, one of the impacts of the pandemic, the horror certainly and the suffering, but there's also been an ability to be far more present. And I mean, just the number of like birds I've seen and just been in contact with. I know I have a deep knowing that it's spirit, and I know it's hard to put that sometimes into words, but how do you all know that the practices that you're engaging in are connected to spirit? What does that look like for you all?
I guess, I mean, this might be a little bit in like not directly answering your question, but I guess the thing I'm thinking about is how, you know, there are intentional practices I do to like expand my awareness or slow my breathing, and you know, like they're intensive. But then to me, the real question is like, how does that integrate into other situations? How does that integrate, you know, when I'm in conflict with somebody, or how does it integrate when I open an email and I'm worried, you know, about what the email is going to say? What happens like when, you know, my kid is like angry, you know, and a little bit hyped up and, you know, gonna maybe make some bad choices. And and so and what does that mean, you know, for like me in relationship and partnerships, you know, where I'm working with folks, especially, you know, in a mixed group, you know, with women of color. And I think for me, when I know that, so for me, it's like it's not a retreat inwards, it's a like reciprocal relationship.
Mhm.
And I know that like I'm in the flow of that, like when I can be under stress and I can still take a pause and take a breath and then actually question like what I'm putting onto the situation and then make another choice. So like I can be like, wait, did I really read that email right? Let me make sure, you know, before I react. Or, you know, like these dear friends, you know, who I'm in deep partnership are asking me to shift the role I'm playing. And like, and I'm going to really hear that, you know, and sit with it and make the shift, you know, you know, yeah, anyways, like I could say more about that, but to not think, not take things personally, B, like bring some breath into it, C, like, no, I don't need to act right away. Like even like a hair's breadth can help me show up in a better way and make better decisions, you know, and be a better partner to people.
No, that really resonates with me. It's like, for me, it's like moment to moment, can I show up with my full humanity intact? How about for Ed, Karen, any thoughts around that?
It's, I mean, I think for me, I was thinking a little bit about how I actually feel the connection to spirit,
Mm,
um, and when I can feel my disconnection kicking in too, like, so often, kind of like Kristen was just describing, like, you know, you are sitting in a room where you're exploring something that's unsolvable. Somebody tells you about the pain that they're experiencing in a direct way, conflict emerges, these sorts of things. And in my body, it feels like blockages oftentimes, like there's something stuck in my chest and my chest tightens, or that my stomach is tightening up. But one thing that I can really tell is when I start, like even on a call like this, when I start feeling like all of the energy and all of the strength and all of the stuff go up in my head, like that I'm really concentrating and I'm really focusing and I'm really hoping that I'm saying the right thing, right? But it's very much disconnecting from that sense that I get when, like, you know, we started with breathing, when my like chest and my belly actually remain open and I can actually sort of feel what other people are feeling, and I can have a sense of my connection to them, and I can be like, there's an openness that I feel, a resonance, even when there's conflict or difficulty or something that I'm not sure how to get sorted out. I'm still able to hold that in a way where um, the connection that we have on a more essential level matters. And I think about, like, um, you know, when we think about the things that we oftentimes say when we talk about white allyship, or the ways to undermine white supremacy, we talk about principles like giving up power, right? Giving up power to folks of color. And folks will throw those terms around all the time. I think that what we should do is we should give up our power. We should make sure that other people have power. And part of why this is such an important question is, like, so what does giving up power actually look like, feel like, and mean for a person who is acting like in a responsible way with like their full connection to themselves and to other people, right? Because part of what white supremacy is and white privileges and all that stuff is our ability to choose to step forward, choose to step back, choose to read a bunch of books and have a bunch of language that we can use that shows how woke we are, all that kind of stuff. Um, but when it comes down to it, can we be in a stance that is open and can feel into what is needed, can feel our connection to other people, and can we make decisions that are in alignment with our beliefs and our philosophies that actually have the best effect on community and allow us to show up fully in whatever our role is, as we're giving up power, as we're doing the things that we're being asked to do as allies.
Yeah, all of that brought up a lot for me. Karen, do you have thoughts around that?
Go ahead, Kelly. I'm
Yeah.
interested to hear what you want to say.
Yeah, so when it was talking about like, and Kristen both talking about dealing with opposition, and that's when spirit really, you can feel it in your body, and I can feel it certainly. Like, I actually just took off my shoes a little bit ago because I need my feet on the ground right now, right? Um, and that's like a practice to be really connected. So I'm just thinking the last couple of weeks, and I've shared a little bit of this with Karen. I'm part of an organization across the country. Many of us signed a letter that was really about taking accountability for the failure to listen to Black and Indigenous and people of color survivors, in particular, leaders and movement builders. Really, at its essence for me, the letter was about listening to and advocating for what Black, Indigenous, and folks of color are telling us is needed. And, you know, we had just a lot of, there's just been a lot of energy around that. And I mean, at the same time, I'm seeing people I'm in deep relationship with that are directly impacted by what's happening right now in our country, right? Um, and I can think of a moment a couple weeks ago when I was depleted. Uh, Sign number one, that I'm not practicing in the way I need to practice. I was tired and I was worried about the energy that was going to be on a Zoom call of a group of us together. It was multiracial space. And so because I wasn't grounded and centered and leading with my full humanity and connected to my spirit, I did exactly what every like white person does. I tried to control it. Like I came up with all kinds of like activities and things that we were going to do to kind of control the space. And I'm just so blessed that one of my colleagues called me in right away and said, that is not what's needed in this moment. Like, I actually didn't have the bandwidth to face the energy of the pain in the moment, which is also another marker of white supremacy, right? And that comes from very deep privilege. And so I, you know, over the years, I have just learned when people call me in on that, that is a gift. That is a gift. And like, it's another awakening and a deepening and just a like in my face reminder, like practice is essential for me. Much in the same way over the last couple of weeks, I've been in space with a lot of very angry people. And angry, I say angry, but I really feel underneath it's fear. And just having to like be the person that's centered and grounded. I had to up my number of hours. I was meditating. I had to breathe low and slow, keep my feet on the ground. Um, you know, for me, the sadness comes from also seeing the humanity in the people that are so angry right now. And I'll share most of these folks were from law enforcement, from sheriffs and police that were super angry about our letter and yelling, name calling, all of that. And not everybody. I mean, some could see that this is an opportunity to grow and evolve. But it was really, my practices helped me be in that space in a way that I'm hoping they could hear some of what I was said. You know, I don't know, but I'm just hoping that, you know, these kinds of practices can really help interrupt white supremacy, anti-Blackness when it's happening in the moment. So that just, yeah, all of that came up for me as you all were sharing.
Kelly, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I am always in awe of you, but this is at this time knowing what you're going through. I mean, I think it's just so apparent that your practice is serving you really well at this moment. And it resonates so much for me when I think about my own relationship to wanting to be liked and loved, and how that is really, you know, it's part of the whole white supremacy dynamic. And the spirit, being connected to spirit, actually helps me overcome that habit. It interrupts that habit, and then it gives me the opportunity to stand in not only my own privilege, but to stand in a position where I can simultaneously deeply disagree with somebody while still seeing their humanity. And that's what you're talking about is, you know, folks are giving you a pretty hard time right now. And you're like practices are leading you to see their humanity despite what must feel pretty stressful, you know.
Yeah. I mean,
So I think,
stressful, yes, but also like also holding the complexity of the harm that they're causing, right? And that
right,
the harm
that's
they're
right.
causing to themselves by not being able to face it. I mean, I think about spirituality is also about that ability to be able to really accept what is. And I was able to accept what is for them. I mean, and frankly, I was sad because I could see in many ways that white supremacy is harming them, and the many ways that our policing systems in this country are harming and killing Black bodies and folks who
Yeah.
are Indigenous and folks
Yeah.
of color. So, I mean, one of the things I've noticed, I don't know if this is true for you all, but the more I practice, the more complex all of these conversations become, the more complex white supremacy becomes, anti-racism, all of it. It's not, once you move beyond that binary of us and them, and you know, it's hard because I want to see some of these folks as them. And when I'm in deep practice, I can help break through that. Doesn't mean that they're not accountable, but I can help break through that.
You're kind of segueing it right into the second question, Kelly. You know,
Should
which
we
is,
should we like do a little like practice first before we go
oh
in?
yes,
What
let's
do we
do that.
think?
Yeah.
Kristen?
I love you guys. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, sure. Yeah. And just, I think the invitation is just to settle back into our bodies and take a moment to pause with like everything we've talked about, and to connect, you know, to connect inside of ourselves, but also to whatever's happening, you know, around us, like not blocking it out or not wishing it away. So wherever you are, just take a minute. You can soften your eyes. If you want to, you can close them, but I actually invite you to keep them open and just keep them soft, so you're not cutting yourself off from input, sensory input. So, and also just, you know, we each have different relationships to being in our bodies. And I'm not, you know, we're not asking you to do stretch beyond what is the right stretch right now. So there's actually a dial. You can turn sensation up or down. And so just invite you to find the right level for you, find the right volume of what you're choosing to feel right now. So whether you're sitting or standing, just start by actually feeling your connection to the earth. So that might be through your feet. It might be through your leg bones, might be up through your hips and in your sit bones, your pelvic cradle. And just, you know, take a minute to just honor that connection and honor the relationship you always have to the earth. The earth is always holding us up. It's always anchoring us in space. It's always the source of our food. It's always the source of those that we love, the source of those who we might be in conflict with. So just connect to the earth. And then take a minute to notice the air around you. So you might be able to access the air in front of you, on the edges of your skin, your face, the fronts of your legs, the air behind you, all the space behind you. There might be more space behind you than you're actually allowing yourself to feel. So extending out in front and behind, and just letting yourself settle into some comfort with that, just comfort inside of your own skin. And then the air beside you, on your left and your right. Again, there might be more space there than you're used to experiencing. And just what happens when you let yourself settle into just the right amount of space where it feels relaxed and open, but still settled. And then if you haven't already, while still feeling your feet, feeling the expanse in the air above your head, maybe the top of your head, the roots of your hair, and feeling that length from your feet all the way up to the crown of your head. One way to experience the length is your dignity, your ability to occupy and be in your own skin while also being with the dignity of others. That there's no competition there, there's no need for a trade-off. And then returning to width from one side to the other, just again, expanding this as much as you feels generative right now, and considering that width is your relationship to others, other people, other beings, other elements. And then returning to depth, front to back, back to front. And again, expanding as much as feels right for right now. And considering that depth is our connection to the long arc, to the people who came before us, all the people from past generations who inform and created this moment, us right in the center point, and then all the future generations who we have some responsibility to creating the trajectory for the future. Holding all of those dimensions, just finding center. And if you want to, you can put your hands on your belly or just notice your belly and notice your center. Your center is actually has all those dimensions. It has depth, it has width. It has height, and it's round. And so just breathing into that center, taking a handful of breaths, letting your center expand and also settle at the same time. And just take a few more breaths in your own time. Don't transition too quickly or you'll lose the thread of attention that you just cultivated. So let yourself transition slowly back to the conversation.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks.
Well, friends, should we kind of dive into the next question? So the second question, which we've kind of explored a little bit, and I think we can continue to hear from one another, and I am anxious to hear and excited to hear from you all. But how have our practices, and I think name some of the practices again so folks can kind of hear the different ways that we practice to reconnect to our spirit and our humanity. How have the different practices for you included taking action or allowed you or created the conditions for you to create action to either with family, with friends, with community to interrupt white supremacy and anti-Blackness?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you so much for that, Kristen. That was just a perfect thing for us to practice together. And in some ways, I guess my response would be contained, like all of it is kind of contained in the elements that we explored through that guided meditation. Some specific things that I do to connect to spirit. Specific practices include, breath practice, meditation, um, Tai Chi. I have a flower setting practice that I do that helps me connect, connect. See a little bit about how I'm doing in the way that I set flowers in a vase. Those are like specific practices that, my teacher helps me cultivate. But spiritual practices, I mean, more broadly speaking, I would say that anything that involves breathing in like quiet, like actually just being, or not like, it doesn't have to be like the silence of the air, just like your own quiet, like to actually take in the things around me and feel connected to them and settle. Like those are very important. And then for me, like I live on Lake Superior, being near the water, being outdoors, finding like having those opportunities to just focus on what I'm doing out there, that helps me connect to spirit in a different way as well. But I'd say that the thing is that it's always a practice of connecting to my own self, feeling my own dignity, as we did in this practice, and getting a felt sense of that. Feeling my connection to the things around me, to the people around me, to the universe around me. That's like a central piece. And then this like depth of connection, like understanding myself as part of a long arc of people, both within my own bloodline and in collective ancestry, both in the future and in the past. That practice and understanding that those have all been critical. And I think that those are critical, like tying our last section of conversation to the question of how this moves us to action. Like, I think what's called for from white folks is the ability to connect to community, connect to spirit, and to hold multiple truths, like complexities and multiple truths in a whole bunch of ways. And no matter what you're talking about, you can start to get into that. It's really complex to talk about like my ancestry, for instance, right? Like within my own ancestry, there are examples of great goodness, great things that happened, like reasons why I am sitting right here in this room, being able to bring myself in the way that I am. Like that's a part of my ancestry that I can connect to, and I can love, and I can feel, and I can support through, for me, it's been through being open to communication with those folks who are in my line, having things from people who have been in my family around me, being open to what happens in dreams, things like that. There's also the reality that that we've been for generations a part of this white supremacist culture, and that those decisions are there, and both things are true at once. You can't just solve it or end it in one fell swoop. But what you can do is you can accept it for what I can do is I can accept it for what it is, and I can focus on building the part that is about the goodness and about the connection, about that breadth and depth and height, my own dignity, my connection to other things, and in the long arc. I can focus on building that with an understanding that what I'm doing is repairing, undoing the things that are within me that that are white supremacy and have been for generations. And then that applies to when somebody in my family says something that's racist, or we do something as an organization that causes harm. So often the problem is, right, that like we want to be in right relationship to it right away. We want to solve the problem. We want the person to stop talking that way. We want all this stuff to be fixed immediately, right? And what's called for in holding those multiple truths is like, so first of all, how do we connect in such a way where we don't distance ourselves and be like, no, I don't want to be associated with this or you. Like, how do we hold that we are connected to it? And then be in relationship to it, how to address the harm that has happened, how to speak directly and plainly to others, or sometimes it's to yourself about what needs to be changed, and then see the dignity and see the humanity and see the beauty as well. So I mean, I'm fortunate that I have family who, like, they didn't grow up in a racial justice movement. So they're learning as these things happen, right? And it's a great opportunity to practice naming and talking about like the racist and white supremacist things that are like literally floating in the air in white communities right now, and doing the work to talk about like what that all means, connecting to the humanity and the goodness in my own family, my own parents, and the way that they care for others, and the way that that for all of us is actually creating healing, both for our own family and our own line, but also like for the community around us and the way that we're able to show up differently.
Thanks, Ed. Other thoughts coming up for folks, Karen or Kristen, around the connection and how you've been able to, that connection to spirit has been kind of the, I almost want to say the magic, but that opportunity that's offered you the chance to step into doing something.
You know, I think about my own relationship to anger, my own relationship to the privilege of outrage, you know, my own relationship to call out culture, to cancel culture, and how my participation in those cultures has been from a place that is not my self-manifesting wholeness. And, you know, it's just, as Ed, you said earlier, you know, it's just kind of from here up. And those things take so much energy. It takes so much energy. You know, I'm still working on it. You know, I still have my moments. But whenever I'm in deep practice, whenever I'm connected to my spirit, I'm connected to my whole self. When I'm connected to my whole self, that gives me space. That gives me space to make choices about where I put my energy. And it gives me space to make choices about my intended impact with myself and with the people around me. It is magic. It is magic. And the connection to the natural world is part of the whole self. And so I just want to make a comment about that. The paradox of the pandemic is that even as we're isolated from ourselves, for me anyway, I'm much more in tune with the natural world that's right in my immediate surroundings, because it's kind of all I've got right now. But and there's been many magical moments where I've been in practice with, you know, like the bridal veil spirea outside my window, and some rocks from Lake Champlain here in Vermont. And that wholeness is, it is the magical pathway to self-acceptance, self-understanding, and a much, much deeper relationship with the earth and with people in a much more humane and mutual way.
Yeah.
And again, this is the stuff that white supremacy interrupts.
Yeah. I so appreciate you said mutual. I was thinking a lot about mutuality, and one of the things that I can see that in my practice to really reclaim and reconnect to spirit is that the quality and the depth of my relationships. I think of my relationships with all of you. I think of all the relationships in my family and folks I work with. And with that comes just that more, it's like a much more expanded capacity to see what's needed in any given moment. And so when I think about interrupting white supremacy over the last few weeks, you know, seeing particularly Black folks in such deep pain in our community, such deep pain and fear, and, you know, what can I do? And so, you know, I do what I can in the moment, and that means like using my positional authority and my privilege to help resource Black leaders in our community to like be able to heal in whatever way that they can heal in any given moment as they're, you know, succumbing and dealing with such such anger in our community, such anger. And so doing what I can, trying not to do those things like I did, like trying to fix it or trying to process the way out of it. But also the practice of really deep listening. When you deeply listen, people will tell you what they need and how you can show up. So it's about showing up very differently. Much in the same way when I've been in space with all the with a number of folks over the last couple of weeks who've been just coming from a place of fear, which looks like anger. The ability to stay grounded can help make that conversation open up in ways that it wouldn't have if I had showed up in a very different way, not connected to my spirit, not connected to my humanity. Being able to see their humanity and deeply listen to what they had to share, but still staying really clear on what is needed in our country in terms of really shifting away from the policing and the violent policing that we have and really building community services, community connection, community accountability in a very different way that doesn't harm and create the violence that we're seeing. Kristen, any thoughts around the piece around connection for you, either with family or community and interrupting white supremacy and anti-Blackness?
Definitely. So, I mean, the quote from James Baldwin from The Fire Next Time, that has kind of followed me around for the last few months is when white people learn to love themselves and love each other, the problem for Black folks will be over. And it's kind of a riddle, right? Like, what does that actually mean? Or what does that actually take? Or what's being, and I've heard that, I mean, he's one voice. I've heard that from other folks as well, and I've also heard suspicion of that, right? And both from folks of color and from white folks. But to me, the piece around complexity that you're talking about, like white supremacy and anti-Blackness and Native erasure and colonization are coexisting in so many forms, yes. Right? They're coexisting in my own experience in the world and like how I show up and how we interact with each other, what shaped me. It's coexisting with family system, it's coexisting with like my neighborhood, it's it's like all the levels, right? And the systems. And so to me, part of, and I had an indigenous friend say to a few of us recently, like, white folks aren't in this moment able to handle the complexity of holding the truths of Native folks on Turtle Island and Black folks at the same time. Like, and there were a whole bunch of people saying to her, like, we just can't hold this all. And so right now we're going to focus on being allies to Black folks, and just how like intense is that? Do you know what I mean? How intense is that? Like that, that there's like this white savior thing going on, right? Like that, like, I mean, yes, it's our problem to solve, and there's like a paradox here of like, it's our problem to solve, and yet we can't solve it in isolation, right? And so I think being able to sit with paradox, being able to sit with complexity, being able to decenter ourselves and be like, okay, I think a big thing for me has been interrupting individualism. And, so this might seem small, but I feel like there are all these circles of mutual aid happening, around me. And part of that is like, how do we care for each other? And so I feel like in real-time practice, there are these circles, multiracial circles of folks in my neighborhood, friendship circles, but how are we aware of who's sick, who's not sick, who has food, who doesn't have food, which elders need to be checked in on? And to me, so for me, like what I'm taking on as the project is like, how do we actually practice a different culture, and at the same time create new systems? And how do we be aware of the problem we're trying to interrupt, but put even more energy into like what's extremely necessary to create? So I feel like, yeah, the practice is like making me a lot more comfortable with discomfort, comfortable with paradox, and comfortable with complexity, and comfortable with relationship, like being in it with others, and walking alongside others instead of solving it for any, solving it or control. Solving is like the same version of controlling it, right?
Yeah. I just think about like all of us as fractals. I think about Adrienne Marie Brown's work, and just like that for me, this disruption or this interruption of white supremacy and anti-Blackness are the small moments, moment to moment. It's not like these big grand gestures that I'm making, but it's just like, how can I like be fully present in the moments, to see the pain, to see the suffering, to see what's possible, what's not possible, to help ground others just by my own grounding, all of that. How about for Ed or Karen, any kind of last thoughts around this particular question?
I just want to add to that list the habit of white supremacy that is about pushing people out. Pushing people out of community, pushing people out of families, pushing people out, and how there's, this idea of holding holding complexity is also holding multiple truths. And so even if we can't see the truth of that law enforcement officer who's, doing things that we think are terrible and causing great harm, we have to find a way to actually stay with that person and hold them accountable at the same time, and support and interrupt the harm. I mean, that's our job, right? Maybe not our job, but that's what when we think about our responsibility as white people to interrupt anti-Blackness, to interrupt white supremacy. We have to stay with it. And there can be a time when we say, you're causing great harm, and we can be really honest about that. And it's not acceptable what you're doing.
Yeah.
But we're going to stick with you. We're going to see your humanity. I mean, for me, that's the big challenge. But that's, again, as white people, we are well trained to push people out that we disagree with.
Any kind of last thoughts before we close out and thank all the folks that were helping us today to hold space? I want to go around the circle one time just for last brief thought. I think we got like 8 minutes.
Yeah, I would just add to that that I think that one thing that's important to remember is that we are, as white people, being called to we're very much being called into action, big action. So connecting to spirit, learning racial equity, thinking and understanding that framework, like that's not a graduation, that would just be the very beginning. And we are being called to a lot of action. And I think part of what's being talked about here is how it is that we actually connect to ourselves, to community, and to the broader reality around us in a way that allows us to actually step into the action that is required for the moment. And one way of thinking about that, I think, is that we know a lot of terms for things that are bad, a lot of things that are racist, microaggressions, a whole gaslighting, a whole list of things that can be done that are sort of involved in the cancel culture. We also know some words for equity, racial equity. We have some concepts of what racial equity could look like. But a thing that we could ask ourselves is, like, as we're talking about those things, as we're thinking about something like racial equity or Black liberation, and we describe what we think that would mean, do we have an understanding of what actually living into that in a moment-to-moment way would be, like a felt sense of how it is that you meet each moment? And are we able, like, in our own wholeness and our own dignity, to connect with people, whether they be white people, whether they be Black people, whether they be Native people, people of all different racial backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, experiences? Are we able to face that in a way that starts to build, I think Kristen was talking about, build this culture. That's what it is that we're looking for. And that's like a central piece to stepping into the action that we're called into.
Thank you, Ed. Kristen, anything you're sitting with you want to share?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, both gratitude for everybody here. And yeah, I think there's like, I guess the last thing I want to say is like, there's the paradox between being called to action and then the energy that you bring into that action, or the direction or the level of connection or not connection, has everything to do with how that action will play out. So I mean, for me, like, again, part of the beautiful challenge is like, how do we do them simultaneously? How do we lead into connection and lean into being in right relationship and partners, and create like life-giving energy for the actions that need to be taken, and keep clarity around, okay, this is the energy that I want to show up with, and this is the energy that will actually create the possibility of something different. Like, they're both equally important, and they're both actions. It's all actions. So just sitting with that, and that it's hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the last thing I would share is yes to everything all of you have shared. I've just really enjoyed being in conversation around these really kind of can be hard concepts. For me, it's really about understanding that essential work of the inner work, the beingness is in service of the doingness. But it just changes every way that I am and I show up in the world when I'm practicing and giving myself spaciousness to really see fully and really tap into my full humanity and my wholeness, even knowing that wholeness is imperfect, which Norma Long had said that recently, and that was such a gift. Thank you. Thank you that wholeness is imperfect. And that every moment is a moment to reset. Like, I mess up all the time, but just knowing that every moment is a moment to reset and reconnect to spirit. And the last piece I would share, and in the midst of all of this suffering and pain, what I would say is this: my own journey of reconnection to spirit has also brought me much joy, much love, deeper relationships in a way that, yes, like, I'm still discovering my whole humanity, and it's not a journey I would ever turn away from. It's been where I need to be and where I need to go. Karen, do you want to close us out?
Sure. I just want to express my deep gratitude to the three of you and to everybody who called in and shared their thoughts in the chat. We want to make an offering to you that you ask everybody to share a commitment to reconnect to our collective spirit and community, keeping in mind that even as we benefit individually from practice, we practice for each other and we practice for humanity. So please feel free to make comments about your commitment in the chat box. I want to really thank Amy York doing the tech work. Holy cats. Talk about herding cats. Thank you. Sierra MacGyver and Lavona Andrew, who are our ASL interpreters. Thank you for your patience with our fast moving mouths. And Lisa Doyen, our closed captioner. Thank you so much. I sit in deep gratitude for this experience. It's a wonderful experience, and really I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Should we close with one breath? Ed, do you want to close us out with a breath?
Sure.
You can do two even.
We'll do 2 whole breaths in the way that we did in the beginning. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your commitments coming across the chat. Hundreds and hundreds of you across the country. Let's all be fractals.